Chapter 22 is about cities and sustainability, and it opens up with this case study that's referenced throughout the chapter about Curitiba in Brazil, which was designed as kind of an eco-city. So they use some strategic city planning, and these themes will come up in this chapter. Mass transit, particularly bus systems, mixed use, high density downtowns, car-free zones, a lot of parks, particularly in areas that were prone to flooding. So they had parks rather than houses. And also, sorry guys, social services for the poor with a focus on children. All right, so about half of the world's people do live in urban areas. The percent of people that are living in urban areas has been increasing. The number and the size of urban areas has also increased. In 2017, there were 47 megacities in the world. So that's a huge increase since the book was published. Urban growth is faster in less developed countries than in more developed countries. And poverty tends to be urbanized in less developed countries. So that means that we have very high portions of people who are living in poverty in these urban areas in our least developed countries, and the book will get into that. So you can see from this graph down here, figure 22.3, that urbanization is quickly increasing in those less developed countries, and you can see where some of the largest cities in the world are located. All right, there's a case study on urbanization in the United States, which is something hopefully you've talked about maybe in history classes post-World War II, as people that's when we really get the growth of suburbs, and then we even get these exurbs, so these residential areas that don't really have a socioeconomic center, that are outside of even suburbs. So we've had a lot of urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is mostly due to affordable land, the availability of automobiles, relatively cheap gas, and little or no urban planning. So urban sprawl is especially a problem in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, places with a lot of available land. And we have, think about living in the suburbs. There are a lot of advantages. It's very nice, but it does have negative effects. So look at those in the natural capital degradation on page 592. And those are mostly due to habitat destruction and then the dependency on vehicles. All right, but urban areas, urbanization, certainly those urban areas have their problems. So major downfalls. There's a huge ecological footprint in urban areas due to all of the resources that have to come in and then the wastes that have to be taken care of. And those are usually imported and exported. There is oftentimes a lack of vegetation or green space. There can be water problems with a lack of available clean water, flooding due to an increase in impervious surfaces and destruction of wetlands, air pollution and water pollution. It's easier for diseases to spread in urban areas. And then we have noise and light pollution as well. Urban areas, you can also get the urban heat island. There's a lot of heat that's generated by cars, by factories, by so much energy being used. You get all of those dark surfaces which absorb more sunlight. So cities tend to be hotter than cooler suburbs and rural areas. And then the book talks about urban areas in less developed countries. So this is when you might hear a lot of different names, slums and barrios in Mexico, squatter settlements, and shanty towns, anything like that. So these very high density concentrations of people living in a small area with very few resources. As an update, the slum that they talk about in India, in Mumbai, is up to about 1 million people now. And it has a population density of about 900,000 people per square mile. So in these areas, these slums, you have a lack of clean water. There's pretty much no sanitation, oftentimes open sewers, which leads to a lot of disease. can be a lack of electricity or reliable electricity. There's air and water pollution, and often they're near hazardous waste sites too. So it's definitely not a great area to live. Good case study on Mexico City here with some good connections to air pollution. And then we get into transportation. And this is when you can think about, in the United States in particular, our reliance on automobiles. So some ways that we could reduce automobile use, one would be to increase the gasoline tax, and then use that increase in money to promote mass transit, bike lanes, sidewalks, etc. But there's a lot of strong opposition to gasoline tax from consumers and the auto industry and energy industry. We are a very car-dependent society, and there's a lack of mass transit right now, so we kind of have a catch-22. Hard to raise the money for mass transit without a gasoline tax necessarily, but hard to tax something when you don't have any alternatives offered yet. Some other options that could be used for reducing our reliance on automobiles would be things like raising parking fees, tolls for roads, bridges, tunnels in urban areas. Some cities have done this. Like to drive into central London, you have to pay a pretty hefty toll. Boston, we haven't seen this happen yet. There are a couple of tolls, get across the Tobin Bridge or to the airport, but imagine if there was a toll to go, down 93 or over the Zakim Bridge. What effect would that have? There are also bike sharing programs. The book kind of talks about all the negative things, but Hubway in Boston has been really successful. They have about 1,800 bikes now, 185 different stations, serving the Metro Boston area. So see what happens. And then car sharing with Zipcar. You don't see Zipcars so much in North Reading, but you see a lot of Zipcars if you're in Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, and close to the city. We have a whole bunch of trade-offs to alternatives to car use, like bicycles, mass transit, buses, and then there's also rapid rail on the next page. So look at all of those. A lot of these you could probably come up with on your own. But think about what would encourage you to use these things. All right, and then we can get into, section 4 gets into urban land use planning. So land use planning, think about zoning, so commercial zones, residential zones, and then mixed use zones. And historically what has happened in the United States in recent decades is there have been commercial zones, so picture like 28 in town, and then residential zones. So what's happening now is we're getting more and more areas that are looking at mixed use zoning, and that can allow for more smart growth. So figure 2219 shows us some possible smart growth tools that could be used. So the idea of mixed use would be, think about if you've driven into Reading or Andover, where they have kind of in their downtown areas buildings that might be 4 or 5 stories high, the lower level, shops, restaurants, offices, and then above that you have apartment buildings, things like that. That's mixed use. So that could be something that could be beneficial. All right, and then how can cities become more sustainable and livable? So, right, we like to focus on our solutions, and that's what the last part of the book does. Keep in mind these models right here in figure 2221, so kind of our traditional housing development versus a cluster housing development could be really useful for an activity we're going to do in class. And then you can even go to a website called walkscore.com, can find out how walkable is your house or potential home. So I looked at my house in Wakefield, and I have a walk score of 75 because I can walk to a lot of different shops and library and grocery stores and restaurants and things like that. And then my house has a transit score of 31 because I can easily walk to the bus, and I can in 10 minutes walk to the commuter rail. So that's pretty good. Then I typed in North Reading High School, and it has a walk score of 38, so not as accessible, and there's no transit score because there's no public transit in North Reading. And then the last part of the chapter just kind of looks at the idea of like an eco-city, which was discussed in that opening case study, and then eco-villages, the science focus box about urban farming. Nice tie into our agriculture unit there with talking about rooftop greenhouses, hydroponics, vertical farms, all of these things that could happen inside buildings in urban areas. And then at the very end, they talk a little bit about living buildings. But I want to point out that they mentioned LEED certification, which is probably something you've heard of before. Our new school building is LEED certified, I do believe. And it just measures the environmental performance of a building. It takes into account things like energy use, air quality, land use, and material use. And you get points depending on how environmentally friendly, if you will, the building is. And higher points means a higher LEED standard. So that is chapter 22 in less than 11 minutes.